Well, my dad used to have a story that I relate to very much right now. He said, well, I'm feeling like the dancing bear. It's not that he does all that good of a job, it's just amazing he can do it at all. Okay. Pam and I came to this church back in 1982. We were still in the phase 1 section at that time. Some of you, as I look out, were there then too. And that's where the solidness of this church, where people are stable and here, and then also new people. I look out at people I haven't seen. And if the church is alive, it's growing. And that's good. And that's what it needs to be. So I'm glad to see people I don't know. And it's good to see people that we have known for years. We came to this church because we were invited by a young man who helped us unpack our moving van. We came here, we didn't know anybody, and this young man's name was Dusty. And he was about a 6th grader, but he was a pretty good sized 6th grader. And he came over and said, could he help us unpack the moving van? And so we had some stuff that, I did need some help. And so while we were talking, Dusty said, do you want to know the best church in Moses Lake? And I said, well, yeah, I would like to hear that. He first asked, did we go to church? And I said, yes, we did. And then he offered that about the best church. I said, well, which one? And he said the Alliance Church. And so I thought, well, that's, do you go there? He had kind of a vague answer toward that, but he had been here for Vacation Bible School and such. So the next Sunday, we decided, well, let's go and meet Dusty and thank him for inviting us. We got here and there was no Dusty. And we looked around and finally we started to ask people, well, do you know a Dusty? No one knew who Dusty was. It was interesting. They said, we think there was a Dusty that came to Vacation Bible School one year. But that was all it took for him to reach out and to make a comment. And for 38 years, this was our church home. So we were always touched by that. The other was the openness of this church. When we came, and of course Dusty wasn't there, but that evening, after service was over, we were invited to the Gears house with several of the church people for an ice cream get-together. And so we went. We thought, well, we don't know anybody. This is one way to do it. The next week, on Saturday, we were at the grocery store shopping, and there, one of the members of the church, as we walked down the aisle, they were coming the other way, and we had our cart, and they had theirs, and they stopped, and they said, well, we saw you at church. You're the people that were new in church last week. I said, yeah? They said, would you like to come to our house after church tomorrow for lunch? And Pam and I looked at each other and we said, well, yeah, we could do that. So we were invited to lunch. We went, we said goodbye, and we went down the next aisle. We came back and met again, and they said, were you planning to come to church next Sunday or tomorrow? And we said, well, we are now. The third week, we thought we might check out another church. But about a half hour before we were ready to leave the house, I got a phone call from the only person I knew in Moses Lake when we moved here. And I'd met him in Colorado. And he called about a half hour before we were ready to go, and he said, my family and I would like to attend church, and we hear that you've been going to the Alliance Church. Okay. And he said, would you meet us? If we show up, would you meet us there so that we're not all alone there? And I said, well, you bet, Larry, I'll do that. And so I went to tell Pam, I said, well, we're going back to the Alliance Church today. The fourth Sunday, we thought we might go check out another church, and they asked Pam to sing. And so 38 years later, we finally slipped out during COVID. And so if some of you say, where did we go and how did we get out? It was right at the start of COVID, and it was a hard time because churches weren't meeting and people didn't know that we were even leaving. Pam had retired, and I had retired a few years before that, but half of our grandchildren were in Wenatchee, and there was a need there for us to come, and so we took that opportunity, and we live. We're easy to find. You know where Costco is. We're just down the road a ways. That's a landmark. So if you're ever over there, we'd like to have you stop by too, even on short notice. Like we're in Costco. Can we come up? We came to Moses Lake back in '82 because I was hired by Big Bend Community College to teach in the aviation department. And I taught full-time for 32 years. In the last 9 years, I've been part-time. I worked under one of the best contracts I've ever had. It has 4 words in it: on call at will. And I said, if you take away half of that, I want to keep the at will part. But I've enjoyed being a part of the program there and the number of students that are flying throughout the world, literally, throughout all these years. But it was this church which was a center and focus point, and was where we were at. And Pam's role in this church was she loved what she did. After teaching for more than 50 years, though, of my life, one of the things that I particularly developed was my interest in the teaching learning process. I mean, here's something in my head that didn't used to be there. It was in somebody else's head, and it got into my head, and then I am able to then sit in an airplane, for instance, or in a classroom or whatever the situation, and take something from my head, transmit it out, and it ends up in someone else's head. And that's how we learn. That's how we grow. I taught many classes at the college then, in the flight instructor class, where we're teaching the students not only how to fly, but then how to teach others. And so in those teaching training classes, we learned and we talked particularly about communication. Now, I don't think that I'm all that great of a communicator at times. My wife will attest to that. But what takes place with communication is that something is transmitted, an idea or a concept or a feeling is transmitted from one person to the other. The effectiveness of that communication is measured by the similarity of what was in this person's head and now what ended up over here in their head. If they're similar, then we have good measurement of success. Do you remember playing a game probably years ago? We used to do it. I haven't done it recently, but you'd have many people in a room like this, and you might have 25 people in a line, and you whisper a message to the first person, and then they're to turn around and whisper it, and then pretty soon, and then you finally ask the person at the end, what's the message? Sometimes it was close, sometimes it was way far off. Sometimes I always suspected that somebody purposely messed it up along the way. But that's communication. So communication is transmitting what's here to there, and then effective communication is that it should be very similar. And the third part of communication is the 3 elements that take place. There's the sender, the receiver, and then there's the message. The sender is the speaker or the writer or the instructor. The receiver is the listener or the reader or the learner. And the message is the word or the symbols used to express this concept and to convey it to the others. And in the midst of those three areas, all kinds of problems can develop. But with that, we're able to communicate. And with that, we'll find as we go through today that God is relying on His word to be communicated from generation to generation to generation to the people who will accept His word. Now, just how lavish and extravagant can communication be? I have a box, an empty box now, but it used to have a bar of soap in there. Just a bar of soap? No, not anyway. This was a very special bar of soap. And I've kept this box, even though we long since used the soap, because I am amazed at just how special this is. This is where communication can take place. It says Jovan Jasmine Cologne Concentrate Cream Soap. Right now, you know this is special soap. The flower of excellence, gracious, precious, and unique, sending its golden message of sensuality in a hard-milled, protein-rich beauty bar that will leave your skin feeling, continue on back, ultra soft. You'll feel the creamy, rich moisturizers penetrate your skin and satisfy its thirst, leaving it dewy, soft, and fresh as the new dawn. Suddenly, you'll feel the total sensuality only this symbol of excellence can exude. The hope, the happiness, the never-ending love. Jovan Jasmine Cologne Concentrate Cream Soap. To experience this satiny sensation of this transport of joy, ... just add water. Just add water. Well, what else can you do with soap? But there was a marketing group. And it kind of reminds me of another story I heard recently where a new founded company was making dog food. And in that dog food, they were having quite success, and they had hired quite a group of people to help in the advertising and the messaging of that. Similar, I think they might have hired these people, because they had great success for a short time, but then after a couple months, the sales started dropping off. So the owner of this company decided, well, it's time to do something, so he got rid of all of the people in marketing and hired new ones. Well, they had some success for about a month, but then the sales started dropping off again, and so he replaced them with a third group. And the same thing repeated over again, where a little bit of achievement, but then the sales just kept going down, down, down. Finally, he called a meeting with all of the different departments and said, we've got to do something. What in the world the marketing needs to be stepped up, and can you give us any marketing ideas? And a newly hired person in the back raised his hand and said, now I haven't been here very long, but can I offer something that I've been hearing? Okay, go ahead. Well, the dogs don't like it. So just marketing something that isn't real or isn't there or isn't part of who you are isn't going to work. In the elements of the sender, the receiver, and the message, let's start by looking at the sender. And I am going to read from Matthew 13, chapter 13. And we're going to see the parable of the sower. And we'll see in this that at this time, the sender is going to be Jesus. He's the one with the message. The sender has the agenda. The sender has the subject. The sender has even prepared effective teaching methods. And so Jesus begins with, or the scriptures begin with, that same day Jesus went out of the house and he sat by the lake, and large crowds gathered around him as he got into the boat, and he sat in it, and while the people stood all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell upon the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell in the rocky places where it did not have much soil, and it sprang up very quickly. But the soil was shallow. But when the sun came out, and the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seeds fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seeds fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. He who has ears, let him hear. The disciples came to him and asked, why do you speak to these people in parables? Jesus replied, the knowledge of the secrets of heaven are given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and he who will have then an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. This is why I speak to them in parables. And then the scripture gives us some prophecies that were told about Jesus. Though seeing, they will not see. Thus hearing, they did not hear or understand. And in them is fulfilled the prophecy from Isaiah. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For the people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and in turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes because you see, and your ears because they hear. For I tell you the truth, many prophets and righteous men longed to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. Now, Jesus is going to explain that parable that he did because of the disciples' request. So listen to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches them away. And snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed that was sown along the path. And the one who receives the seed that fell in the rocky places is the man who hears the word and at once receives it with joy, but since he has no root, it lasts only a short time. When trouble and persecution comes because of the word, he quickly falls away. The one who received the seed that fell among the thorns is the man who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke it out, making it unfruitful. But the one who received the word that fell on the good soil is the man who hears the word and understands. He produces a crop yielding 160 or 30 times what was sown. Jesus was teaching in these parables. His receivers are the crowd, but among the crowd is the disciples. The message that he uses through this parable is a familiar farming illustration to them. And that's what a good teacher does. You have to use something that the receiver is going to be able to comprehend. You can't use terms and such that are only to the trained in that particular subject area. But this idea particularly that Jesus is transmitting is kind of a strange one. And that is that not every receiver of the word is going to understand and grow in a relationship with Christ. And for a variety of reasons. Well, what about the disciples? What was different? What made them different? What did Jesus say? Well, you get to understand more about this. And it's because the disciples asked, and they came to Jesus and they wanted further information, further instruction. If you're a teacher here, what has enlightened your heart more than when a student stays after class and comes up and wants to know more about it? That's the person you really start taking an interest in. Jesus was asked by these. They stayed after class, and they asked Jesus to explain this, and so Jesus spends his time after class explaining what's happening. The second part of communication then is the receivers. Who are these people, these receivers? Well, it's us, and it's the rest of us out there. The Israelites in the wilderness were receivers of God's blessing and grace. They were delivered from Egypt. And yet when they were out there, Psalms 95 tells us that they grumbled and complained. And God saw this. And in Psalms 95, it's a test of how do you receive when you receive the word. And that is, he says we should be doing it with joy and we should be thankfulness. God has been here before in our life. He will be here in the future. He will not let us down. But the Israelites forgot that. Sometimes people today forget this. And you start to wonder and you start to grumble and complain. And at the end of Psalms 95, it's really kind of harsh, but God says, on an oath, I swore that these people will not share in my rest. That's kind of harsh coming from Jesus, coming from God. But he's saying you have to be a receiver. Now, we have to learn to be ready to learn. We need to be ready to listen. We need to be ready to hear. I had a professor in school. His name was Bill Miller. In grad school, and one of his comments when he would start a class would be, I have my notes, I'm ready to teach. I will teach until I run out of material or you're done listening. Now, we were pretty sure that we were going to probably meet our end of the bargain a lot sooner than he was going to meet his. Years ago, while we were still living in Illinois, I was asked by a farmer there who owned an airplane, had his own strip on the landing field on his farm. And he asked me if I would be willing to teach his wife and his daughter, 17-year-old daughter, how to fly. Well, I said, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. It turns out that he was risking losing his medical certificate and he would not be able to fly anymore, but his dream was, well, if I could get my wife and daughter to fly and they could pass the physical and then we could all go flying still. And you know that if you're a pilot, you know exactly what that story goes like. So I went out to try to teach him to fly. Now, the wife's heart was in it for her husband's sake, but it wasn't in it for the sake of wanting to learn to fly. But she did want to somehow make this work for him. The daughter was 17 years old, and I was up on the third lesson. I was not seeing a lot of enthusiasm from her, but still, I was going to teach her, and I was enthusiastic, and certainly I can convey this enthusiasm, and this will go far. So about the third lesson, we're up, and we're dealing with the section of learning to fly, which is called stalls, which has to do with the wing losing lift because we're too slow. of speed. We don't have enough air flowing over the wings to support the weight. And so at that point, the airplane is going to nose down, not in a Hollywood-type dive. Of course, Hollywood always makes it worse. But still, you need to recover from this. And so we teach people how to recover from this in case that should happen. This is usually a time with a third lesson, that the students are on the edge of their seat. This is a time it's uncomfortable for them. This is a time where they're a little bit nervous and worried, but it's got to be done. And so I noticed that she was getting kind of edgy, and I thought, okay, all right, we're getting through. This is an important part. And so then, just as the stall warning horn starts to go off, I noticed she starts to reach down, and I'm thinking, oh my, she's going to grab the bottom of the seat to hang on. You don't really need to do that. But no, that's not where her hand went. Her hand went back to the back seat. She opened up a backpack, pulled out a Bride magazine, opened it up and put it on her lap, and then took the controls of the airplane. I surmised that she probably wasn't ready to learn to fly airplanes. She had other things on her mind. Yes, a Bride magazine. Okay, well, that part's fine. But she's not there paying attention to the lesson. Yeah, it is. I've always thought it was hilarious, actually. Recently, I've been, this summer and this spring and that, I've been hearing some, we've been traveling a little bit. We've been attending churches at other places, and then also at where we are attending in Wenatchee. And really been hearing some good sermons, and amongst them, I was introduced to a person by the name of Dr. Henry Cloud. One of the things in my introduction of Dr. Henry Cloud, he's an author, and particularly the latest book is Necessary Endings. But I found out that Joe McCullough taught a class on, I forgot the name of the class. You taught a book by this gentleman years ago on boundaries. And so he's been around, but I listened to his podcast recently because I was introduced then that he has, in this Necessary Endings, he describes the listener or the people in 3 different categories. There are the wise, the foolish, and the evil. And so you can get on YouTube, and there's podcasts that he has there, and one of them is just if you Dr. Henry Cloud, and if you put in wise, foolish, and evil, you'll get it. The wise, he says, are people when they see the light or they hear the truth. These are people that change themselves to align with it. They are people who accept feedback and correction with appreciation. They thank people for helping them. They approach life with a happy face. If we had a little smiley emoji, it would be a happy face. Proverbs is full of information about the wise and their attributes. Proverbs 9 says, "Rebuke a wise man, and he will love you. Instruct a wise man, and he will be wiser still. Teach a righteous man, and he will add to his learning." This is the wisdom of a person who sees that he needs correction and he accepts it. The foolish, he says, on the other hand, are those who, when they see the truth or they see the light, they change it to align with them. When you give feedback or correction to a foolish person, they don't own their part of the problem or the solution, but point out always that it's someone else who is the cause. They prefer to shoot the messenger rather than to hear the truth. They approach life with a frown and with an angry face. Even Proverbs knew this. And in Proverbs 9 it says, "Whoever corrects a mocker," or a foolish person in some translations, but whoever corrects a mocker invites insult. They'll turn it on you. And Proverbs also says, do not rebuke a mocker, or he will hate you. A wise person will love you. A foolish person will hate you. And then the third group, he says, are evil people. And he says, these are people who have destruction in their heart. They want to inflict pain, and they enjoy seeing good things and good people suffer and be brought down. Believe it or not, they're out there. And avoid them. So we've looked at the sender. We've looked at who the receivers are. We need to be clear what the message is that the church is proclaiming. I'm going to read from Matthew 13, starting with verse 24, and the familiar parable of the weeds. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seeds in your field? Where did these weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servant asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you're pulling the weeds, you may root up some of the wheat with them. Let them both grow together until the harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, and then gather the wheat and bring it into my barns." I'm going to skip down to verse 34. Jesus spoke all these things to the crowds in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable, and so it was fulfilled that what was spoken by the prophet, "I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter hidden things since the creation of the world." Then he left the crowd and went to the house, and the disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us this parable of the weeds in the field." See, the disciples, they want to know, they want to hear. They're constantly ready to learn more. Jesus answered, the one who sowed the seeds, the good seeds, is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are the angels. And the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so that it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels and will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. Jesus is the Savior. He sows good, and Jesus will save. We, the church, are living in a time of grace. Our world has both good and evil coexisting. We often say, "Why does God allow this?" But they are both here. And this time of grace is here so that more might come to be able to hear and to believe and to be saved. God's patience is that we might be able to have others come to know. In his time, God will bring about the judgment which belongs to him. Sinful hearts, in the meantime, will be changed by Jesus and the conviction of the Holy Spirit. The role of the church is to welcome people and to give them a place and resources where they can develop their relationship with Jesus. As we saw in the parable, the church's role is not to pull out the weeds, or to purge the church. It's to provide a place where people can find out what it ought to be like, where we can get along with people that are even different, but where we can be that utopia that the world is looking for. Francis Schaeffer, in his book, The Church Before the Watching World, says that the church's duty is to give an example of how we ought to live. Thus, he says, this is done by demonstrating an environment of love and unity. The two very things that the whole world is searching for. And which is only possible to achieve through the work of Christ, through his church. However, too often times, people leave the church disappointed because the church hasn't been able to demonstrate those qualities either. When I look at these scriptures, and when I look at where God wants to take us in our role in this communication of his word, I see that sometimes we are the sender. The gospel message is in the hands of the likes of us. The Apostle Paul tells us that it has pleased God to save those who believe through the foolishness of what we preach. Foolishness to the world, but yet is there to bring salvation to those who believe. 1 Corinthians chapter 1. I also see sometimes we are the receiver. Sometimes we hear and we listen and we change our lives. Other times we hold back that which we're not quite yet ready to give up. Sometimes we are wise, sometimes we are among the foolish, but we are part of the receivers at times. And sometimes we are the message. 1 Peter chapter 2, live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good works and glorify God. Our good deeds and our good works are not for our glory, they are for God's glory, that people would see. We are the church before the watching world. May the message we communicate be glorifying to God. God bless this congregation.